We've got the context about the declining American-made beer, what's in store for alcohol's fourth category that goes beyond beer, wine, and spirits, and why you need to start rethinking about opportunities in the on-premise. I'm Sightlines Director of Insights, Brian Roth, joined by lead analyst Kate Bernat for this episode of The Gist. And Kate, let's jump in with a version of a chart that many of our listeners and viewers may have seen at some point in the last couple of weeks. It was making the rounds across multiple social media platforms. People were highlighting Beer Institute domestic tax paid shipments and their annual decline. The figure, if you are watching us on YouTube, you actually see the most up-to-date version of this chart, which shows the last few years. 2024 is an orange line, which is below all the rest. Here's the problem, Kate. People are trying to figure out why. Why is domestically produced beer, that's any beer made and sold in the U.S., having such a hard time these days? Cannabis, just pure abstaining, all of these things. What is the reality of what people should actually have in mind about what's going on here?
Surely, though, cannabis or sobriety plays some very minor role. I would not ascribe it the importance that some people are in explaining what's happening with declining domestic beer production. Instead, I would look to competition. I would look to
Mm.
the fact that there is just so much more out there for people to choose. I mean, for decades, domestically produced beer was sort of the default beverage. It was what pretty much everyone drank everywhere. Today, you have, spirits and liquor available in ways that they weren't before. Rise of cocktail culture, uh, RTDs. I mean, we have flavored malt beverages. We have all different types of choices that simply weren't a thing years ago. Ciders, seltzers. Let's not forget imported beer and the tear that is on. Whereas imported beer, used to be sort of the fancy option for snooty yuppies. Like that is not the case anymore. Imported beer today is, Modelo's the best-selling beer in America. So simply more choices are going to eat into that share of domestic beer.
Yeah, there is, I think, a challenge here where people see what's going on with domestic beer that's produced and sold in a vacuum, that, oh, this is on decline because people are not choosing it for, a few very specific reasons, when in reality, there are more options to choose on store shelves than ever before, alongside that whole import thing. There's a really interesting note from the Beer Institute that was in a recent story on Brewbound, where what we're looking at is the Beer Institute figures for the beer that's made and sold here. And it was highlighted that in a positive spin, that's a quote, that beer is growing on occasion weeks. So what that means essentially is that beer is succeeding in spaces where there is, tradition behind how you would choose beer. But the problem and this is where my mind immediately went to, is that between Memorial Day and Labor Day is beer season. But that also is now the highest point of sales for basically any other kind of, canned or bottled beverage, from FMBs, RTDs, hard seltzer, cannabis products
Mhm.
see sales boosts between Memorial Day and Labor Day. The challenge here is not that, it's just a whole bunch of people are saying, I'm not drinking anymore. It's that they're choosing from a whole other set of things that excel in the same time and space that beer has traditionally.
Right. And the fact that beer does well on beer occasion weeks is like beer winning the lowest hanging fruit kind of.
Mm.
If beer does well on 4th of July or beer does well on the Super Bowl, like I would hope so for beer's sake, right? Because those are the occasions when consumers are really wired to choose beer. And I think the fact that beer is struggling on those non-occasion weeks again speaks to this competition factor, that unless beer is like the obvious cultural default,
Mm.
people will choose other beverages. And now products that are not beer are even eating into those beer occasion weeks. So it's just a lot of competition across the board. And beer is going to need to, if it wants to regain those volumes, it's going to need to remind people to drink it, not just on the most obvious holidays.
Yeah, it's a little bit of good news, bad news, where the good news is that beer in many cases is entrenched in certain days and these kinds of occasions where it's, the cookouts, the sporting event. These are very much like Americana moments with beer. The challenge is all these in between times. And this was highlighted by the Beer Institute as well, that, for the beer industry to succeed, it was a challenge of having to find its place again in all of these moments in between these very beer-centric holidays or occasions too, which also just means beer is just having a normal amount of competition in a consumer market.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just business, baby. Beer used to enjoy this space as just the obvious option for most drinkers, right? You could bring a 12 pack of whatever domestic light lager and to a party and like wipe your hands and know that everyone was going to enjoy that. I think today there's no assumption that you could bring anything that everyone would drink, right? Mm-hmm. People have personal preferences, they have dietary restrictions, etc. There's just a lot more options. It's hard to find that across the board default drink that every single person is going to enjoy. So I think it just speaks to the changing nature of consumers and consumption and what people are looking for more than we can point at any one boogeyman here for beer's declines.
Yeah, I'll bring back up this chart. This is Harris polling that was analyzed by the Brewers Association that basically shows craft beer drinkers choose everything else. If you're looking at this with us on YouTube, you see between 2019 and 2024, the lines for basically anything that is not craft beer are going up in terms of consumption trends for craft beer drinkers. So that includes hard ciders up, hard seltzers up, FMBs up, imports up. Kate, just a quick call out too to some of the work that you've done recently focused on Michelob Ultra. This is a beer brand that is succeeding. It is a domestic beer brand that's succeeding, but it also represents kind of a core piece of what we're talking about, this narrative where, this is a continually growing brand, but it also just represents a space where, not as many domestically produced beer brands can resonate in the way that Ultra can.
Right. Ultra is really highlighting what other domestic brands have struggled to do, which is maintain relevance, to stand for something, in essence, to say something about the person who is drinking them. Michelob Ultra really associated itself with that sort of aspirational, active lifestyle, sort of premium lifestyle. And other domestic brands have, in their effort to kind of be everything to everyone, have kind of become nothing to anyone. And I think the fact that Michelob Ultra is succeeding in its messaging that way just kind of shows what those other brands have struggled to do lately and kind of need to find their footing in terms of what they mean to people. Why would someone choose that? What would it say about them? What does that brand mean to them? I think they've just been kind of mucking about for a decade or so and not really resonating in the way that they once did.
Quick note, because we haven't explicitly talked about cannabis because, Kate, we have loads of content that we created for Sightlines about cannabis. Sightlines.news, if you are a subscriber, we have a recent multi-part series that delves into it, as well as a recording with Kate and I that gives a whole host of additional information about why cannabis is not specifically stealing significant share from alcohol right now. So we can make a blanket statement that people pointing toward, cannabis is the reason for this change of drastic declines in domestically produced and sold beer. Whether it's academic research, sales trends, anecdotes from people in the industry, retailers, that is not the case. So if you are not a subscriber to Sightlines, you can head over to sightlines.news, and we have a cache of content for you to help you get clarity on what that is. One thing that we do have that shows some clarity is, as we talk about the decline of domestically produced beer, is the success of the fourth category. This is a space, we're talking about basically beyond beer. That has been getting, a lot of increased attention. Nielsen IQ recently, in an analysis of the broader RTD market, which includes hard seltzers, FMBs, spirit RTDs, and wine RTDs, essentially makes the case that no traditional alcohol category is growing right now unless it has an RTD as part of it. This sounds scary, Kate. What do we know about this situation when we talk about fourth category dominance and what it means for not just producers, but also why they should be using this as insight to learn from consumers?
So I think two very fundamental planks we need to lay down about RTDs. Number one, this is a very new, still relatively, category. The fourth category, was not really defined as such or even analyzed as such by data companies until the last few years. So RTDs are new, and new things, because they are starting from a small base of growth, will post very impressive growth numbers. This is not to deny what's happening with RTDs, but also just to say that new stuff grows really fast when people are organically interested in it. And then the second plank that I think is important for brands and maybe producers listening to us today is this is not to say everyone needs to make an RTD. I think that's unfortunately been a message that some folks have taken away. We see such a glut of new products on shelves. And so do not pay attention to RTDs solely because you think you should make one. But the trends in RTDs and the reasons consumers are choosing them are important for brands of all sorts to know. Even if you are a traditional wine producer, you should understand what's happening with RTDs, because it's going to help you message your product, meet some of the same demands that consumers are bringing to the table, and some of the motivations for why they're choosing RTDs could also be applied to, non-ready to drink products potentially.
Yeah, there is a piece of this that we certainly remind our Sightline subscribers on often about the impact of flavor and occasion and feeling and format. These are spaces where RTDs excel in a way that, I guess the kind of the traditional, baggage, I'm using air quotes here, baggage of, beer, wine, and spirits doesn't. It just meets the modern consumer in a different way, especially in spaces of flavor too, which is helping a lot of these RTD brands stand out. And BevNet had a call out specifically toward a High Noon, which is kind of the juggernaut of the RTD category, especially in the spirit-based section, where that has started to hit a bit of a plateau in terms of that brand's growth. And part of that is simply just because there are more options in the RTD space than ever as well. And so, when we think about some of these aspects, Kate, as it relates to flavor and format and just the number of items that are available, what's important to keep in mind about what's going on and what's maybe we should have our eye on moving forward?
There's just a lot of newness, a lot of new entrants here. Remains to be seen what the staying power of some of these are. For context, there were about 900 new RTD items introduced to shelves last year. Nielsen IQ puts the total number of RTD products at about 7,500 nationally, which would mean that 12% of RTD brands have been on the shelf for less than a year. You and I have talked about some of the spaces in which these brands are less sticky than they'd like to be. We've talked about Monsters, FMB products, Hard Mountain Dew, some of the soft to hard crossover, just kind of not not being decade-long brands, right? These are kind of a novel flavor moment, and then consumers move on. Obviously, something like High Noon, much more of a lasting brand, but there's just a lot of new stuff on shelves. Consumers are excited to try what's new. They're excited to try new flavors. Whether they repeat purchase those really varies from brand to brand.
I'm going to highlight kind of the trade in, trade out theme of what we're pointing at a little bit too. Hard seltzer specifically has been declining. I do want to call out still $3.7 billion of sales in retail hard seltzer. So when people talk about hard seltzer being dead, 3.7 billion is the same amount as both spirit and wine based RTDs combined. To underline what's going on there too, if you are watching us on YouTube, you will see this chart that looks at the sales difference between the top 5 selling hard seltzers and the top 5 selling spirit-based RTDs. The narrative that I think I so often hear is, well, people are picking High Noon because they gave up White Claw. Well, here's one way to think about it. This is not exactly apples to apples. I want to give that caveat. But the dollar amounts, if you look at the changes in the top 5 brands of hard seltzer and spirit RTDs, 4 weeks, 13 weeks, 26, 52, this is through midsummer of 24, is almost the same in and out. So you could make the story. I'm not saying this is the absolute truth, but you can see here the potential of how people may be seeing spirit-based RTDs as, that premium version and a different version of what they got used to with hard seltzer as well. And so, the category itself has really changed, beer, wine, spirits and the way that consumers are trying to find drinks. But there is also, I guess, something of a ceiling for those two categories specifically, when we're talking about seltzer and spirit-based RTDs as well.
I think that shift between, malt-based and spirit-based seltzers, what that says to me is there is some segment of consumers that want that premium spirits-based experience. It didn't really exist when White Claw launched. Mm-hmm. So now that it exists, they can choose it. But still, the vast majority of consumers, when they're thinking about a spiked seltzer experience, it's overwhelmingly still malt-based. Some of that is about retail availability. But I think given how much kind of doom and gloom there is about malt-based hard seltzers, like, it behooves us to kind of harp on the fact that they are still, a ton of people are buying them. They're making a ton of money. People still really enjoy them. I talk to young consumers frequently who really like malt-based seltzers. Full stop.
These are drinks that really built themselves and their brands in the off-premise. The on-premise is something, Kate, that we have often been trying to think about for Sightlines subscribers, a space in which there's just not a ton of easily accessible data and even anecdote, of which we are working to change. In that, one of the things that you've been working on has been a multi-part series thinking about draft lines. Give us a sense of what you've learned from your reporting and what Sightline subscribers will be learning themselves as we start to get into this.
What I learned is that really the on-premise has been something of a black hole, and particularly since COVID. I think all the disruptions to the on-premise and to draft sales, which were already declining going into the pandemic, draft beer sales, and then have really not recovered since then, even as things reopen. I think it just led a lot of people to write off that segment. Just like, you know what, draft beer, like, it's just kind of on the downslope, and we're just going to concentrate on chain retail and packaged formats. And some of that has to do with, again, just, that lack of clear data to show what the opportunities could be. You get these top line decline numbers and you think, well, no point in focusing there. And I think that's been to the detriment of the consumers who are in the on-premise and who are looking for draft products, and to the brands that have focused there and have worked with their wholesaler or other, tech companies to kind of get on-premise draft data, they're really kind of cleaning up because everyone else is out to lunch on the draft tower. So both from data and case studies, we've been able to illuminate what happens when you pay attention to a segment that other people are kind of ignoring.
On the screen, for those with us on YouTube, you will see a chart that looks at U.S. Census data about spending at home and away. The trend lines we were looking at relate to food and beverage stores and grocery stores as specifically, two lines, and then food services and drinking places. That's the on-premise consumption occasion, basically. There's a lot of reasons why these lines diverge, but the biggest thing to highlight is that the amount of spending as a share of a person's budget has been increasing for on-premise consumption for a few years, basically post-pandemic, but most notably, it's been hitting a really nice plateau in 2024. That's actually a few percentage points higher than 2014. Now, part of this certainly has to do with the fact that just things are far more expensive than a decade ago, but at least does also point toward this broader trend of what's happening. And this is something, Kate, that you have highlighted in multiple pieces for Sightlines, the opportunities for on-premise occasions and the fact that consumers also just want to find these experiences that matter to get away from their home to be on-premise.
Totally. We've tracked how important experiences are to consumers today, particularly young consumers. They want special moments. They want special memories. They want something experiential that they can post about, talk about, remember. And that's hard it's not impossible to recreate at home, but a lot of that happens on premise. And brands that can meaningfully be part of those really memorable experiences are seeing success not just in the on-premise, but we also have some data to show the way that the on and off-premise sort of tag team together in terms of sales and brand building, that there is something still about the optics of the on-premise and about being introduced to a brand in the on-premise. I mean, think about how hard it is to be introduced to a brand on a chain retail shelf these days. I mean, it happens for sure, but that discovery process is difficult. It's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel, I think. I mean, consumers are staring at a wall of options, and why would they pick your brand that they've never heard of before, never seen before, out of just a sea of other things? If they've had a positive experience with it in the on-premise, that's a really compelling reason to choose that. And we have data to show that in some cases that happens. It's an old school mentality, but it still happens.
If you are looking for unique and special experiences, sightlines.news is the place to find it. Everything that Kate and I talked about today, as well as lots more, you can find in-depth insights and analysis at sightlines.news, including the upcoming multi-part series on draft and on-premise occasions that Kate has been working on. That's going to be it for this episode of The Gist. If you want more in-depth analysis and actionable insights, join us at sightlines.news, where subscribers get weekly updates delivered to their inbox. Until next time, I'm Brian Roth with Kate Bernat.